Hello Year 9 and welcome to your English lesson today. It's Tuesday the 28th of April. I hope you're all well. I'm glad you've tuned in to the second and final instalment of The Telltale Heart. Just have a little look at what we're doing today. Obviously we're reading and understanding a pre-20th century text. But today we're really going to focus on important reading skills. So as you can see here, we are going to consolidate our understanding of the different reading skills in preparation for a reading assessment that I'm going to mark. So let's start by identifying what these different reading skills are. And I should just start by saying none of these are new to you. You have been studying these skills since year 7. Actually, no, you have been studying these skills all the way through primary school too. But we're now looking towards your GCSE, and you will be thinking about the sort of skills that you need to develop before you start the GCSE. And so that's what this lesson is about. So let's start with thinking about reading. It's just reading, okay? I'm sure lots of you are thinking that, but actually, as many of you are aware already, there are lots of different reading skills, and the ones that we're mainly going to be focusing on are comprehension skills, inference skills, and analysis. Now you've got lots of practice, you've had lots of practice of these just in year 9 alone, let alone thinking back to year 8 and year 7. For example, I know that in year 8 you did a Dickens unit of work where you looked at reading Great Expectations and other extracts from Dickens stories. You will have practice every single one of these different reading skills when you did that scheme of learning. Same for when we read Of Mice and Men at the beginning of the year. Again, you would have practiced all these different reading skills. You even wrote an essay on Curly's Wife where you will have been doing a lot of analysis, hopefully. So let's take inference as a starting point, because I suspect that there are some of you watching this right now who are thinking, I'm not entirely sure what inference actually is. And that's okay, because sometimes we don't necessarily refer to it as inference, but it's something we do all the time. So let me bring up, I've got a bit of a thing about bringing up these GIFs at the moment. Let me bring up this one. Now, what would you say this animal is feeling right now, just from looking at this? If you said tired or sleepy, you would be correct. And what's giving that away? We've not been told that this animal was tired or sleepy, but the yawn probably gives it away, doesn't it? And the droopy head and the droopy eyelids. So therefore, we have made that inference. We've not been told, but we've made that inference by what we can see and the evidence in front of us. We're making that assumption that this animal is sleepy or tired. Okay, next one. I don't know if there are any Simpson fans out there. This is Marge Simpson. Right, how is she feeling right now? Hopefully you said she's feeling angry. And if you did, there are probably a few giveaway signs, a sort of frown, but also she's gritting her teeth, which shows that she's cross, and she's probably angry at Homer Simpson, her husband. She often is. Again, we're not being told this information. This is the information we've got in front of us, the evidence that we've got in front of us, and we've made an inference based on it. Last one. And I really hope that you haven't started feeling this already at the beginning of my lesson. But yes, it looks as though this little boy is bored. Clearly, he's not in an English lesson. Yes, and the giveaway signs here are sort of glazed over eyes, the expression on his face, that he's tapping his fingers. That's always a good sign, isn't it? And again, the evidence in front of us suggests that he's bored, but we've not been actually told that information. He hasn't told us he's bored. He's just presenting the evidence there. So therefore, we can take from this The inference is when we kind of read between the lines, but also we make an interpretation based on the evidence that's in front of us. And remember, writers aren't going to tell us everything, and we have to work it out, and that's part of our inference skills. So how might this look in a piece of writing? Well, you can see here with the first one, his eyelids began to droop and he yawned. That might be how it would be seen in a piece of writing, and therefore we might infer that he was tired. Marge Simpson, yes, she said through gritted teeth. That might be how it would seem, how it would look in a text. And again, we would infer that she's angry, cross. And the boy slowly tapped the desk as his eyes glazed over. That again might be how that would be presented in a text, and we would be able to infer that the boy was bored. Okay, right, your turn now. Number 4, it was like being on a roller coaster ride. What might you infer about that? I'd like you to pause the video now and write down your answer. Okay, good. Hopefully you've paused and written down what you think. Now, there isn't one answer for this, if I'm honest. There could be lots of things, but it does kind of depend what you think is like being on a roller coaster ride. I used to love them, so for me, being on a roller coaster ride would be something exhilarating, something fun, something perhaps slightly daring or dangerous, and so that's what it would feel like to me. So that would be my inference for that one. And there's another one for you. Holiday in a caravan does mean you need to have good relationships with those who are sharing the space with you every day. Okay, what would your inference be about this particular example? So pause now and write down your answer. Okay, hopefully you've paused and you've written down your response to this. What do you think that might mean? Now, there are a couple of little clues. This idea of you need to have good relationships with those who are sharing space with you. We've got the semicolon, every day, exclamation mark. To me, this suggests that holidaying in a caravan can be quite cramped. And that you might get on top of each other a little bit, and relationships might get a little bit fraught or something like that. Now, it doesn't actually say that there, but I have made the inference from what I think is the tone of this. Holiday in a caravan does mean you need to have good relationships with those who are sharing the space with you every day. So this sense that it's actually you're stuck in a small space with lots of people every day you're there, and just kind of there's a slight tone to that, isn't there? Again, that is my inference, and sometimes we might infer something that the writer didn't actually intend us to infer, but if we can back up what we're saying with evidence, then who's to say you're wrong? Basically, you could get marks for it. So hopefully you feel clear about how you make inferences and what inferences are. If you're still not sure, you feel a little bit kind of, I need a bit more practice over it, good, because that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a little bit more practice, and I'm going to sort of give you some guidance about how you infer and analyse, and then afterwards I'm going to be asking you next lesson, 2 lessons time actually, to do an assessment that I'm going to mark. Okay. I couldn't leave analysis out. I think everyone's familiar with analysis and they know what analysis is all about. Some people think English teachers overanalyse. Not going to say anything about that. But I've got an opening line to a poem that I absolutely love. It's Wilfred Owen's Exposure, and it's about being exposed to the elements during World War One. And if you're interested, Google it and have a read. It's a chilling but beautifully written poem, and it is one that's on the GCSE specification. So it starts with the lines, "Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us." And I just love this opening line because there is so much to analyse in just one sentence. And poetry is well known for being the best words in the best order. And I think that this line from the poem Exposure is a brilliant example of that. So we might think about analysis by starting with, what do we learn about the weather and nature, because that's what this is about, the iced east winds. What do we learn about it? So think about, what are we being told about nature here? And if you're not sure at this point, well, a good way to start is to take it right back to basics and start with, is it positive, is it negative? And in this case, I think we can see that it's negative. Once we have decided that nature or the weather is being perceived in a negative way, then we can start to unpick and try and find the evidence. What is it that is making it negative, and in what way is it negative? So then we look at words, then we start focusing on words. So for me, I would be focusing on the fact that it's been described as merciless. And we know that to have mercy is to allow people some sort of forgiveness, or stop the pain in some way, but it's merciless, so it doesn't have any of that. It's not going to stop the pain or anything. And we're told that it's an iced east wind and it knives us. So I would sort of look at this and think that the weather or nature is out to get us, because it's actually trying to hurt us. It doesn't have any mercy, it doesn't care about us at all, and it's actually trying to knife me, so it's actually trying to hurt me. It's almost vindictive, may I say, and then we might take that a little bit further and think, how has the writer created this effect? Nature is not vindictive, it's not personal, it's not trying to get us normally. But so why has the writer done this, and how has the writer done this? You might have noticed some sound effects when I read it. The merciless iced east winds. Do you hear that sibilance, that repeated s sound? And it has a sort of quite horrific sound in this. It's not a nice soft sound here. It seems to be almost snake-like, almost evil, almost like the sound of the whistling of a wind. And also the fact that we've got this use of a metaphor, or even to the extent you could say it is personification, because the wind is trying to knife us, so that's actually an action, human action. So the wind is being personified, and in that sense it's showing the wind to be like a human who would try to kill somebody. And that's the effect that's being created here, that nature has been personified as a human murderer, and somebody who doesn't care. So it's a very interesting and powerful opening to a poem, and it pretty much tells us the direction the poem's going to go in from that first line. But you can see here that from something like this, we can take individual words, we can decide what we think the suggestion is behind those words. We can look at sound as well, and we can look for metaphorical language as well. And all of that is analysis, and that's very different to inference. But both of those reading skills are absolutely crucial skills that you need to practice and get better at for GCSE English language, both paper 1 and paper 2. So it is really important that we start looking at that now. Okay, so without further ado, we are going to continue our final part of the Telltale Heart, and I will be asking you some questions, comprehension questions, your understanding, to make sure you understand the text, some inference questions, and some analysis questions in the middle of reading the story, just to keep you thinking about how those different reading skills work. Okay, so take your mind back to the last video lesson. We had a narrator who was telling us that he's absolutely not mad at all. Okay, perfectly sane. He may well have been ill at the beginning and a little bit delirious, but actually he's completely sane, and he talks directly to us and tells us that there's nothing wrong with him except the fact that this old man, who actually he has no beef with at all, he actually quite likes him. I think he says he actually loves him, doesn't he? But he hates that eye. He's got a deformed eye, hasn't he? And he hates it. And because of that, he has decided that there is no other option, but he has to kill him. Yeah. And we got to the part last video lesson where he was opening the door, and for a number of weeks he was basically spying on him, waiting for that eye to open, but it didn't open. And this one particular time he opened the door and the old man heard something and said, "Who's there?" And we left it there with the narrator in the room holding his lantern, and the old man has just asked who's there, and nothing. We stopped there. So let's read the concluding part. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. I should just say at this point, sorry, I should have said it earlier, but you did work on the vocabulary marked in red on here for your last lesson. So you might want to get those words out and have them in front of you to help you remember what those words mean. You might not, you might remember, but just in case, that might be useful. It was open, wide, wide open. And I grew furious as I gazed upon it, saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. So at this point, because the lantern, he's opened it up so little that a tiny, tiny ray of light, he says, like the thread of the spider, so as thin as a spider's web, he's got it on the blind eye. So the old man can't see the light because it's on the blind eye. Clever. And I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over acuteness of the senses. Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. Sorry, turn that off. Such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. Okay, just so a quick comprehension question here. Why was the narrator being so careful to open the lantern? Okay, so hopefully that one was quite easy. Hopefully you were able to answer that. He is trying to line it up onto the blind eye. He doesn't want to wake the man up. He doesn't want the man to see him, something along those lines. If you did, and you got it right. Okay, what made the narrator angry? Okay, hopefully you can see at the end here, because he says, it increased my fury. And it was the sound of his heart beating that increased his fury. So a little bit of inference. Why is the old man's heart beating so loudly? Because he's scared. There you go. We haven't been told that he's scared, but we've inferred that he's scared because the old man's heart is beating loudly. Okay, let's carry on. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbour. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the bed. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no more pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha ha! Okay, so he's killed the man, he's cut up the body, and he's hidden him under the floorboards. Okay, so a bit of analysis. I want you to have a think about the effect of the narrator's use of the second person here. What's the effect of that second person? Why does he use it? And what does it make us think about the narrator, the fact that he's talking directly to us? What do we think the effect is of that? Okay, so you can pause it just here if you want to, have a little think, and maybe jot down some notes and then come back and I'll tell you what I'm thinking. Okay, hopefully you paused there and had a little think about that. For me, the fact that Edgar Allan Poe has written this in the second person a lot, talking directly to us, makes me feel a lot more connected. I feel uncomfortable about it because I don't want to be that connected to this character, but I am. I feel like I know what's going on, and I feel a lot closer to the action. Therefore, I'm a lot more invested in the story because I feel as though I am there with him every step of the way, the horrible steps of the way. And the fact that he's trying to convince me so much that he's not mad just makes me think that he is mad. So it hasn't really worked in that sense from his perspective. He's almost kind of, protesting too much to be sane, and actually that makes me think that he's more mad. But it also allows me to get into the mind of him as a murderer. So I feel as though I can follow what he's doing in horror a lot more because I'm part of his thinking out loud. So that's kind of the analysis I give for that. You might have something different. That isn't the only thing you could say, but that's a kind of response that you could come up with. Okay, we're nearly done. When I had made an end to these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, they came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police station, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but they still chatted and sat and chatted still. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. Okay, so let's do some inference skills here. Why did the narrator want the officers to leave? Well, he doesn't actually say. He says his head ached, he fancied a ringing in his ears. So he's starting to feel a little bit unwell. Can we infer a little bit further? Why might he be feeling a bit unwell, and why does he want the officers to leave? What could that be? We don't know, but what could it be? Could it be guilt, I ask you? Did some of you say that? Good. Could it be the guilt that has started to make him feel bad, and actually he wants the officers to go now? Could be. That's just a little bit of inference there, isn't it? Okay, so the last bit. No doubt, I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers... I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with a violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise grew over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, they heard, they suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart. The end. So there we go. He could have got away with that, couldn't he? But the guilt was eating him up inside, and he could hear the beating of the heart underneath the floorboards, and it turned him mad. So the irony here, he was mad in the end, wasn't he? Even though he was trying to convince us that he wasn't, the beating of the heart, the crime that he committed, turned him mad. Okay, well done. Thank you for staying with me through that story. There are a couple of things you can now go on and do on YouTube. So I will put the links to these on to show my homework along with the slides from last lesson and this lesson, so you've got the full story there if you want to go over and have a look at it again. This one is a link to a Simpsons episode where they have taken the story of a telltale heart, and this happens to Lisa. It's done in a comedic way, obviously. So for a bit of fun, you might want to watch that and see a bit of intertextuality where they've brought in another text into their text, which is the animation of The Simpsons. And also there are quite a few other interesting animations on YouTube for the Telltale Heart. So I will put links to those on. Do go and have a look at those. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the session that we'd be working towards some reading assessment, and what I would like you to do next Show My Homework lesson, I'm going to upload some different reading questions that I would like you to answer based on this story. You are going to send that work in to me. You can take a photo of it, or you can send a document to me, whatever, it's absolutely fine. And I will make available to you on Show My Homework a self-assessment form. And I will do a video lesson where I will go through some of the answers to those questions, and show you some examples of some really good answers of the analysis and inference in particular. And hopefully you can self-assess yourself. In which case, after we've done that lesson, that's when you're then going to do your assessment. So hopefully before you do it, you will have had practice. I will have given you some models and shown you some good answers, and shown you how you could improve, and then you'll be able to self-assess yourself, and you'll be able to know what you need to do to improve. And then I will set you a reading assessment on something that's not on what we've done. It will be a completely new text. Okay, so that's kind of the direction we're going in over the next week. Once we've done that, we're going to move on to a totally new topic, and so I will tell you more about that next week. So well done, and enjoy the YouTube clips, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.